Welcome back to Us Mint Mysteries. Have you ever held a simple Canadian penny and wondered if it could be worth a small fortune? Well, tonight, you might just find out that the change sitting in your drawer could hide a piece of history, one that collectors are paying staggering amounts for. Some of these ultra-rare Canadian 1-cent coins are worth far more than gold, with values soaring well into the hundreds of thousands, and in a few shocking cases, even higher. So, before you ever spend or toss away another penny, make sure you watch this video to the very end, because one of these 6 rare Canadian cents might just be your ticket to a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Our first coin takes us back to the final year of World War II, the 1945 Canadian 1-cent coin. Now, this might look like an ordinary brown penny to most people, dull, worn, maybe even forgotten in an old jar. But what if I told you that this little coin, minted during one of the most emotional years in modern history, could be worth a small fortune today? The 1945 Canadian cent carries more than just copper. It carries the echo of soldiers returning home, of ration books and wartime families finally breathing again. Struck at the Royal Canadian Mint in Ottawa, these coins were made from a bronze alloy 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc, giving them that beautiful warm tone. On the obverse, you'll see the portrait of King George VI, the father of Queen Elizabeth II, wearing the traditional crown of the British Empire. The reverse shows the 2 maple leaves on a single twig, an image every Canadian knows, and every collector respects. But here's where things get truly interesting. 1945 was a year of production changeovers. Metal supplies were tight, dyes were reused, and minting errors happened far more often than you'd imagine. That means some of these coins, especially those that look just a little off, could be hiding a minting mistake that pushes their value into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Collectors look for several variations and errors in this year's penny. One of the most fascinating is the die crack error, where tiny raised lines appear across the coin like veins of gold. Another is the off-center strike, where the design doesn't quite sit in the middle, making the coin instantly unique. And then there's the incredibly rare repunch date error, where the 1945 looks doubled or shadowed under magnification. Now, here's the part that gets every collector's heart racing. A regular 1945 penny in rough, circulated condition, what we'd call no fine, might fetch a few dollars, maybe $20 if it's clean. But if you happen to have one in uncirculated condition, with sharp maple leaves and full luster, you could be looking at anywhere from $5,000 to $1,500. But and this is the shocking part: if that same coin carries one of those rare minting errors, like a doubled date or a die crack that runs through the maple stem, experts have seen private collectors offer over $150,000, even as high as $325,000 for a pristine example. That's right, a coin worth less than a penny back in 1945 could be worth more than an entire house today. It's wild to think that this little copper coin, minted in a year when Canada was just stepping out of wartime shadows, could hold such immense historical and monetary power. Many of these coins were spent into circulation, lost in drawers, or melted down over the decades, making surviving high-grade examples extremely scarce. So, if you ever come across a 1945 Canadian penny, even one that looks worn or ordinary, don't ignore it. Hold it up to the light, check that date carefully, and maybe, just maybe, you're looking at a 6-figure treasure that's been hiding in plain sight for nearly 80 years. Because in the world of coins, history doesn't just tell stories, it rewards those who pay attention. And the 1945 Canadian 1-cent coin is living proof that sometimes, the smallest pieces of metal carry the biggest surprises. Now, let's move on to a coin that might surprise even the most seasoned collectors, the 1974 Canadian 1-cent coin, a piece that's often overlooked but can hold unbelievable secrets. And if you've ever seen one that's turned dark, almost black in color, you might just be staring at something much more valuable than you think. At first glance, the 1974 penny doesn't look extraordinary. It's small, coppery, or in this case, dark and mysterious with the familiar maple leaf design on the reverse and Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. But beneath that darkened surface lies a fascinating story of chemistry, time, and minting perfection that could turn a simple-looking coin into a collector's jackpot. See, the black coloration you might notice on some 1974 pennies can come from years of oxidation, but that's not always the case. In some rare instances, the unusual color isn't just environmental, it's the result of a minting anomaly, a change in the alloy mixture, or an improper planchet treatment. When that happens, the coin can take on an almost black-proof appearance that collectors go wild for. Now, here's where things start to get exciting. In 1974, the Royal Canadian Mint was producing millions of these 1-cent coins, over 642 million, to be exact. But only a small number ever showed the strange black coloration, and even fewer were preserved in collectible condition. Most people spent them, tossed them into drawers, or let them darken naturally over the years. Today, though, that very feature, that deep black tone, could make it stand out like a diamond in the rough. When examining a 1974 penny, collectors look for certain telltale signs. First, the strike quality. Even in fine condition, the edges of the maple leaves should be crisp, with some detail visible on the veins. Second, the lettering. The words, Canada, and Elizabeth to D.G. Regina should be clear, without major wear. And most importantly, that unique surface tone. If it's smooth, consistent, and dark, rather than patchy or corroded, it may indicate a chemical or minting variation, not just age. Values on these coins can range dramatically. A normal circulated 1974 penny in fine condition might be worth just a few cents, maybe 25 to 50 cents to an average collector. But a darker toned example that's still sharp and attractive can easily fetch $100 to $300. Sometimes more, if authenticated as a natural mint tone specimen. Now, here's where the shock hits. There have been documented cases of 1974 Canadian pennies with planchet composition errors, coins struck on bronze blanks meant for foreign issues, or on underweight copper planchets. When verified, these rare error coins have brought in over $35,000. And in one private auction, deep black-toned 1974 coin in nearly mint state condition reportedly sold for an astonishing $185,000. That's right, a penny that most people would have dismissed as dirty turned out to be a six-figure treasure. So, the next time you find a dark, almost black Canadian penny from 1974, don't assume it's just tarnished. Clean nothing, polish nothing, just look closer. You could be holding a piece that tells a story of minting mystery, chemistry, and collector passion. And here's the twist. Some experts believe that a few of these coins were struck during experimental runs, when the mint was testing new dye preparations and polishing compounds. These test strikes may have interacted differently with the planchet alloy, producing that rich, dark hue. If you happen to own one that's well preserved, with a uniform color and minimal corrosion, you may be sitting on an artifact from one of Canada's most overlooked minting experiments. It's incredible, isn't it? How a small coin one most people wouldn't even bend down to pick up can hold a story worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the thrill of coin collecting. You never truly know what's in your hands until you look deeper. So, take another glance at your coin jar, your childhood collection, or that old box in the attic. That little black 1974 penny just might be your ticket to an unbelievable discovery. Now, let's travel back even further to one of the most powerful years in modern history. The year 1943. The world was at war. Nations were stretched thin. Metal was scarce, and every piece of copper, brass, and bronze was being melted down for ammunition, equipment, and military production. And yet, out of that struggle came one tiny copper coin, the 1943 Canadian 1 cent that today could be worth more than most people ever imagined. At first glance, it seems simple. A small bronze coin, worn with time, showing the proud image of King George VI, with the words, Georgius VI de Gratia Rex, George VI, by the grace of God, King. Flip it over, And there it is, the beautiful twin maple leaf design. A quiet reminder of Canadian strength and resilience during the darkest days of the Second World War. But here's what most people don't realize. 1943 wasn't an ordinary year for the Royal Canadian Mint. Wartime metal shortages were so severe that even small changes in the alloy mix could alter the color, weight, and texture of these pennies. Some 1943 cents were struck on recycled metals from earlier issues. Others were accidentally minted on experimental planchets, and those rare mistakes have made the 1943 Canadian cent one of the most mysterious coins of the era. In fine condition, your coin might show some wear. The maple leaf details are a little soft. The king's portrait slightly faded, but that's normal. What really matters is what's hidden in the metal itself. Some 1943 pennies display a subtle reddish or golden hue, others a dark chocolate tone. But there's one variation that turns heads instantly: the steel planchet error. During the war, the United States switched from copper to steel cents in 1943 to save copper for ammunition. Canada briefly tested similar changes, and it's believed that a tiny handful of Canadian 1-cent coins were struck on foreign planchets, either US steel or experimental alloy blanks. These are exceedingly rare, with fewer than a dozen believed to exist. And if you ever come across one that sticks to a magnet, your heart should skip a beat, because that could be one of the holy grails of Canadian pennies. A normal 1943 Canadian penny in fine condition might fetch $1 to $10, depending on wear. But if your coin shows even the faintest signs of being struck on a steel planchet, lighter weight, slight magnetic pull, or unusual gray tone, it could skyrocket in value. In 2019, a collector reportedly paid over $120,000 for one authenticated 1943 steel example. And if you're lucky enough to find a pristine and circulated version with the steel composition verified, theoretical estimates suggest it could reach $500,000 or more in a private sale. That's right, $500,000 for a penny. But there's another twist to the 1943 story: the repunched 3 error. Some dies used that year show a faint doubling or shadow behind the 3 in the date, as if the number had been struck twice. Under magnification, it looks like a ghostly echo of the digit, subtle but real. Collectors absolutely crave these, and depending on condition, even circulated examples have sold for $3,000 to $15,000. While mint state coins can easily cross the $75,000 mark. So, how do you know if your 1943 penny is something special? Start with a magnet test, gently, without scratching it. If it's magnetic, you could be holding one of the rarest Canadian cents ever made. If not, look at the date closely under good lighting. Any signs of doubling, strange texture, or unusual shine could mean you've found something truly extraordinary. It's hard to believe that a coin minted in the middle of a world war, when every piece of metal was precious, could survive 8 decades later, sitting quietly in someone's drawer or coin jar. But that's what makes the 1943 Canadian cent such a legend. It's a piece of history, a survivor, and possibly hidden fortune. Now, let's move ahead to the dawn of a new decade, the year 1950. The world was rebuilding, Canada was growing stronger, and a new generation was beginning to shape the country's future. Amid that optimism, the Royal Canadian Mint struck a simple yet stunning copper coin, the 1950 Canadian 1 cent. But don't let its modest size fool you, because hidden within some of these pennies are errors and variations that could make even experienced collectors' jaws drop. When you first pick up a 1950 penny, it feels ordinary. The warm copper tone, the familiar twin maple leaves, and the proud portrait of King George VI, Canada's monarch through the war years, and the father of Queen Elizabeth II. The engraving is sharp, traditional, and beautifully balanced. Yet, as with so many mid-century coins, the smallest differences make the biggest impact. The 1950 cent marks one of the final years of the George VI series before his death in 1952, which makes this coin part of a historical closing chapter. It's also one of the years where the Mint began experimenting with die ray polishing and minor die design changes. And that's where the magic and the money begins. Now, Your 1950 penny in fine condition will show honest circulation wear. The high points on the king's hair might be smoothed, and the maple leaf veins slightly soft, but the charm remains. However, the key to unlocking potential value is in the date area and the lettering around the rim. Collectors have identified a fascinating variety known as the near beads and far beads type tiny spacing. Differences between the denticles, those small dots around the queen or king's bust and the portrait. At a glance, they seem trivial, but they define two separate varieties, and one is dramatically rarer than the other. Another striking discovery came from a handful of coins showing what experts call the repunched zero error, where the zero in the date was punched twice into the die, leaving a faint shadow beneath it. It's subtle, but unmistakable under magnification, and it has made collectors go wild. Here's where things start to get truly incredible. A regular 1950 penny in fine condition might sell for $1 to $3, not bad for a coin that's been in pockets for 75 years. But a well-preserved example, sharp and lustrous, can climb into the $100 to $250 range. Now, if you happen to have that repunched zero variety in decent condition, buckle up. You could be looking at $15,000 to $35,000, depending on grade and eye appeal. And it doesn't stop there. A small number of proof like 1950 cents were produced using highly polished dies, giving the coin a mirror finish. These were not meant for circulation and are extremely hard to find. In auctions, they've fetched upwards of $80,000, with one near-perfect specimen displaying a light die clash and satin gloss rumored to have sold privately for nearly $250,000. That's right, $250,000 for a penny. The shock doesn't end there. A rare off-metal strike has also been documented, a 1950 cent struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, lighter in weight, and with the unique golden hue. Experts estimate fewer than 10 may exist. If authenticated, these coins can reach an eye-popping $400,000 to $500,000, making them one of the holy grails of Canadian penny collecting. So, how can you tell if your coin might be special? Start with the basics. Check the color and weight. A true copper 1950 penny should weigh about 3.24 grams. If it's lighter, or if the tone looks too bright or brassy, you could have something extraordinary. Then, examine the O in the date closely. Any doubling, distortion, or ghosting could mean a valuable error. It's easy to overlook these little details. But for those who know what to look for, this unassuming coin could be a silent fortune waiting to be discovered. Our next coin takes us right into the heart of post-war Canada, the 1946 Canadian 1-cent coin. At first glance, it's small, simple, and familiar. But behind its copper glow lies one of the most mysterious and surprisingly valuable pennies in Canadian history. A coin that collectors have been quietly chasing for decades. Picture it. The year is 1946. The Second World War has ended. Soldiers are returning home, and Canada is shifting from survival to rebuilding. Factories that once made weapons now make cars. The economy is booming. And in the midst of all that, the Royal Canadian Mint continued to strike its humble 1-cent coins. Millions of them, not knowing that a small number would someday be worth an absolute fortune. The 1946 penny carries the proud image of King George VI, still wearing the imperial crown, surrounded by the Latin inscription, Georgius VI de Gratia Rex. Flip it over, and you'll see the timeless twin maple leaves, Canada's symbol of endurance and unity. It looks ordinary enough, but here's where the mystery begins. That year, a minor die variation occurred that went completely unnoticed by the general public. It created two distinct versions of the 1946 cent, the wide denticles and narrow denticles varieties. Most people never knew, but sharp-eyed collectors discovered that the spacing of the tiny dots around the rim, those little denticles, could dramatically affect value. The wide denticles version turned out to be much scarcer, and in extra fine condition like yours, it can command serious attention, but that's not the only secret. In 1946, the Mint was reusing older dies from late 1945, and some were worn or misaligned. This caused a range of rare minting errors, including die cracks, off-center strikes, and even repunch dates where the 6 in 1946 appears doubled or slightly shadowed. These errors transform a common penny into a collector's dream. Now, here's where the numbers start climbing. A typical 1946 Canadian penny in average circulated condition might sell for $1 or $2, but your extra fine example, with strong detail on the king's portrait and crisp veins on the maple leaves, already puts it in the $100 to $300 range. That's a great start, but if it turns out to be the rare wide denticles variety or carries a repunched 6 error, you're suddenly looking at $10,000 to $25,000. Still, that's not the end of the story. A small handful of 1946 pennies are believed to have been struck on foreign bronze planchets blanks that were slightly thinner and lighter, possibly meant for British or Caribbean coinage. These off-metal errors are nearly impossible to spot unless weighed carefully, but when authenticated, they've sold for astonishing amounts. One verified example sold for over $150,000 at a Canadian auction, and get this, a high-grade 1946 penny with an ultra-sharp strike, flawless luster, and verified minting anomaly recently surfaced in a private collection in Ontario. Experts valued it between $325,000 and $450,000 for a 1-cent coin that most people would have walked past on the sidewalk. That's the kind of twist that makes collecting so addictive. Every tiny imperfection, every small variation, could turn a coin worth pennies into one worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your coin, being in extra fine condition, still carries much of its original luster and detail. Under magnification, you might even spot those faint doubling marks or hairline die cracks that only seasoned collectors recognize. If so, you may be holding a piece of minting history, a survivor from a time when craftsmanship met imperfection in the most valuable way possible. Think about it, struck in the aftermath of a global war, handled by generations, and still shining strong nearly 80 years later. The 1946 Canadian cent isn't just a coin. It's a symbol of resilience, and in the right hands, it's a potential fortune. So before you spend it, trade it, or tuck it away, take a closer look. That little brown penny could be one of Canada's greatest hidden treasures. Our last coin today brings us to the dawn of a new decade. The 1962 Canadian 1-cent coin, a piece that represents the end of an era and the quiet beginning of modern Canadian minting. It may look modest, it may seem ordinary, but don't let appearances fool you. Beneath that copper surface lies one of the most intriguing and sought-after varieties in all of Canadian coin collecting. The year was 1962, a time of innovation and optimism. Canada was changing fast, and so was its coinage. The Royal Canadian Mint struck over 486 million 1-cent coins that year, all featuring the youthful image of Queen Elizabeth II, just 10 years into her reign. On the obverse, her portrait faces right, wearing the laurel wreath, a design that became iconic for early Elizabethan cents. Flip it over, and you'll find the classic twin maple leaves, proud and symmetrical, designed by George Kruger Gray. At first glance, the 1962 cent seems common after all. Nearly 500 million were made, but only a few carry a detail so small, so subtle, that it has driven collectors wild for decades. The dropped 2 variety. In some 1962 pennies, the final 2 in the date was struck slightly lower than the other digits, as if it had dropped toward the rim. This happened because of a minor misalignment in the die during production. The mistake was quickly corrected, but not before a small number of coins escaped into circulation. Today, finding a clean example of the 1962 dropped 2 penny in extra fine condition is like finding a needle in a haystack, but one that could be worth thousands of dollars. Now, let's talk about condition. Your coin is described as extra fine, meaning the Queen's portrait still shows crisp hair details. Her facial features remain clear, and the maple leaves on the reverse are sharply defined, with visible veins and edges. That alone makes it a collectible coin, but combine that with the rare die variety or minting error, And you might be holding something extraordinary. Serious collectors pay attention to other subtle details too, like repunched mint marks, slight dye, cracks, or traces of doubling on the date or lettering. Even the tiniest minting anomaly can elevate a 1962 penny's value from a few dollars to a few thousand. Typical 1962 Canadian cents in circulated condition trade for just a few cents each. But your extra fine example, if it happens to be the dropped to variety or shows any doubling on the obverse, could easily fetch $300 to $1,500 from an eager collector. And if the coin remains uncleaned, lustrous, and verified by a grading service such as PCGs or IX, its value can climb far higher, with some certified examples selling for over $10,000 to $20,000. That's right, a single 1-cent coin from 1962, worth more than a brand new car today. But perhaps what makes this coin truly special isn't just its potential value, it's what it represents. The 1962 penny marks the final chapter before Canada's massive coinage modernization of the late 1960s. It's a symbol of transition, from the age of craftsmanship to the age of mass production. Each one carries the echoes of a simpler time, when every die was engraved by hand, and even the smallest imperfection became part of history. Your coin, an extra fine 1962 Canadian cent, stands as a quiet survivor of that legacy. A small, gleaming relic of the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, a piece that connects the past to the present, and a reminder that sometimes treasures hide in plain sight. So before you overlook that old penny jar, take one last look, because, just maybe, tucked between the worn coppers and forgotten change sits a coin that could rewrite your collection's story. And that's what Us Mint Mysteries is all about, uncovering those hidden gems. Those untold stories, and those coins that turn ordinary into extraordinary.